8:47 p.m. Eastern, Friday, March 13, 2026. The Situation Room is dark except for the screens. Somewhere in the northern Persian Gulf, about 480 km north of the Strait of Hormuz, a 5-mile-long coral island called Kharg is on fire. The smoke is visible from satellites. The smoke is visible from space, and the man responsible for that fire just posted about it on Truth Social. Moments ago, at my direction, the United States Central Command carried out one of the most powerful bombing raids in the history of the Middle East and totally destroyed every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Kharg Island. That is the exact wording, capitalized, clear, with no doubt, broadcast to 90 million followers before any press conference, any briefing, any phone call to allies. This is how the 14th day of a war that has already killed over 1,000 people gets escalated through a social media post. But here is what nobody is telling you about that post. There is a third sentence, a sentence that holds both an olive branch and a loaded gun pointed at the global economy. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reasons of decency, I have chosen not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. Decency, that word, in the middle of a war. We're going to come back to that word and what it really means strategically. But first, understand what Kharg Island is, because without that, nothing else in this story makes sense. Kharg Island is located roughly 35 miles off Iran's Bushehr province. It is about the size of New York City's Central Park, but it has a loading capacity of about 7 million barrels per day, and roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports pass through it. Read that again, 90%. Not a pipeline, not a storage depot, the island. Most of those exports are shipped to China and India, showing the island's importance not only to Iran's energy trade, but also to wider global oil markets. So, when Donald Trump says he destroyed the military targets on Kharg Island, but spared the oil infrastructure, he is not being kind. He is holding a gun to the head of the entire global energy market and saying, "I'll put the gun down, but only if Iran does what I say." That is not decency. That is leverage. And right now, on this Saturday morning, the entire world is waiting to find out whether Iran blinks. But wait, before we get to what Iran is about to do, we need to talk about what happened in the 30 minutes after that Truth Social post. Because something happened that changes the whole calculation, something officials are describing privately as both a sign of desperation and a possible opening. We will get there. Signal number 1 arrives in about 1,000 words. Keep watching. Let's rewind to February 28, 2026. Because this war did not start on Kharg Island. It started in a villa outside Tehran. It started with an assassination. Mid-morning on February 28th, U.S. and Israeli forces began carrying out joint strikes on Iran, nearly 900 in just the first 12 hours of what the United States called Operation Epic Fury. The attacks targeted Iranian missiles and air defenses, other military infrastructure, and Iranian leadership. According to U.S. and Israeli officials, the timing of the first attack was tied in part to being able to target Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, before he could go into hiding. Khamenei was killed in the first wave of strikes, 900 strikes in 12 hours. The sitting supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the man who had ruled for 34 years, killed on day 1. If you think that did not completely change the math behind every decision that followed, you have not been paying attention. Here is what that decapitation strike did. It created a vacuum, and into that vacuum, the most dangerous actors on the Iranian side rushed in headfirst. CIA assessments suggested that a hardliner from the IRGC would replace Khamenei, and his son Mojtaba Khamenei survived an airstrike on March 4th and was publicly announced as the new supreme leader. Not through any democratic process, not through any constitutional mechanism, but through the rushed succession of a regime fighting to survive. Mojtaba Khamenei, remember that name, he is the hardliner's hardliner. In comments read by an anchor on Iranian state television, Mojtaba Khamenei warned that the strait would remain closed as a tool of pressure. The message also included a warning of possible further attacks against U.S. military bases in the region. And the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, the parallel military state inside a state that answers not to the civilian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, but to the supreme leader, they saw the chaos as an opportunity. A spokesperson for the IRGC's Khatam al-Anbiya headquarters said that any vessel linked to the United States and Israel, or their allies, will be considered a legitimate target. You will not be able to artificially lower the price of oil. Expect oil at $200 per barrel. The spokesperson said $200 a barrel. Let's talk about what that actually means for you. Right now, as you are watching this, Brent crude, the international benchmark, has surged more than 9% as traders weigh the possibility of weeks or even months of turmoil in energy markets. It is hovering at $101 per barrel. A reported Saturday that the average price of a gallon of gasoline was $3.68 in the United States, up 23% since the start of the war. That is the price today. Now here's the domino effect that nobody wants to say out loud. If the Strait of Hormuz stays closed, truly closed, the war will cut the global supply of oil by about 8 million barrels a day, the International Energy Agency estimated. If oil hits $200 per barrel, as the IRGC threatens, Goldman Sachs analysts have modeled a 15 to 20% drop in S&P 500 valuations within 30 days. Gas at $9 per gallon in the United States, jet fuel costs that ground commercial aviation, fertilizer prices that collapse food production chains. The conflict disrupted about 20% of global oil supplies passing through the Strait of Hormuz, causing prices on the Brent crude oil market to rise from around $70 to over $110 per barrel within days. That is 14 days. Imagine 60 days. Imagine 90. The Congressional Research Service has already flagged that roughly 27% of the world's maritime trade in crude oil and petroleum products goes through the strait. Not 20%, 27%, including helium for semiconductor manufacturing, sulfur for fertilizers, LNG for European homes, still weaning off Russian gas. But here is the catch. This is the first pivot. The moment the entire narrative flips on March 13th, just hours before Trump's Kharg Island Truth Social post, something extraordinary was quietly reported by a senior Iranian official speaking to CNN. A senior Iranian official told CNN that Tehran is considering allowing some vessels to pass through as long as the cargo is traded in Chinese yuan, not dollars. Yuan, let that sink in. Iran, a country whose navy has been largely destroyed, whose air defenses have been wiped out, whose supreme leader was killed on day one, is not asking for a ceasefire. It is not asking for mercy. It is asking for a geopolitical redesign of the global energy payment system. It is asking China to become the de facto guarantor of the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for letting oil flow again. That is not the request of a defeated country. That is the request of a country that knows it controls a choke point that even the most powerful military on earth cannot simply bomb into submission. And Trump, whether he understands the full consequences or not, responded with Kharg Island, 90 military targets. The strikes destroyed more than 90 Iranian military targets, including missile facilities, but preserved oil infrastructure. U.S. Central Command said the Josh and Sea Base, an airport control tower, a helicopter hangar, air defense installations, all of it gone. And the oil terminal, the terminal that processes the equivalent of 6.3 million barrels per day, untouched. That is a message not to Iran but to China, to India, to Japan, to South Korea. Every nation that depends on that island for energy. The message: I have a hostage. Her name is Kare, and I will only hurt her if you make me. Spare us. Trump on Saturday called for more nations to send warships to the Strait of Hormuz to defend oil interests there. In a Truth Social post, the president wrote, "Hopefully, China, France, Japan, South Korea, the UK, and others that are affected by this artificial constraint will send ships to the area." Think about what that sentence means diplomatically. Trump is asking China, Iran's biggest oil customer, a country that has sent a special envoy to broker a ceasefire, a country whose financial lifelines to the IRGC are documented, to send warships to enforce a blockade against its own supplier. He is asking China to choose between its economic relationship with Iran and its need for oil. He is pushing Beijing into an impossible corner, and Beijing for now is saying nothing publicly. But Beijing is always doing something privately. Now let's talk about the third person in the room, the person we mentioned at the very beginning. The person no one is naming publicly, but whose shadow falls over every meeting, every back channel, every shuttle diplomacy effort happening right now in Muscat and Doha and Geneva. His name is Steve Witkoff, and the story of how we got to Kharg Island burning tonight runs straight through his failures. Go back to February 26, 2026, less than 48 hours before the bombs started falling. Witkoff and Jared Kushner were sitting in a conference room in Geneva less than 48 hours before the U.S.-Israeli coordinated strikes on Iran began. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi in Geneva for a third round of Omani-mediated talks aimed at reaching a nuclear agreement. Despite Omani Foreign Minister Badr bin Hamad al-Busaidi's assessment that the United States and Iran made substantial progress toward a nuclear deal during the February 26 talks and the agreement to meet again on March 2 for technical talks, Trump said he was not happy with the progress or the way they are negotiating. Not happy. 2 days later, the bombs were falling. 10,000 people are now dead or wounded. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Oil is over $100 a barrel. And it all pivots on that phrase, not happy. But here is what the Omani mediators were saying privately. A Persian Gulf diplomat with direct knowledge of the talks told journalists that Witkoff's description of a key conversation was false. The diplomat said that the Iranians in that Geneva meeting were not bragging about bomb material. They were offering to give it up. The Iranians told Witkoff that Iran was willing to give up the enriched uranium as part of a new agreement with Trump. Iran's uranium stockpile, the 10,000 gigas of enriched uranium that U.S. officials had been citing as the main reason for war, was on the table, gone. Iran would ship it out of the country. And instead of taking that offer back to the president, Witkoff reportedly described the talks as unproductive. Witkoff did not have enough technical expertise or diplomatic experience to do effective diplomacy. His lack of knowledge and his wrong description of Iran's positions and nuclear program throughout the process likely shaped Trump's assessment that talks were not moving forward and Iran was not negotiating seriously. That is not a guess. That is what arms control officials are saying publicly. On the record, the war that has now cost over 2,400 Iranian lives, 13 American military personnel, 773 Lebanese civilians, and triggered the worst energy crisis since the 1973 oil embargo, may have been driven in part by a real estate developer who did not know the difference between a centrifuge and a reactor. And yet, here is the second pivot. The moment the floor shifts again. Even with all of that, even after the bombs, the dead, the burning tankers, the closed strait, there are signals tonight. Quiet ones, the kind that do not end up on Truth Social. Following the attack on Kharg Island, Iran would be wise to lay down their arms and save what's left of their country, Trump wrote on his Truth Social platform. The fake news media hates to report how well the United States military has done against Iran, which is totally defeated and wants a deal, but not a deal that I would accept. He posted separately, totally defeated, wants a deal. Now read that very carefully. He is not saying Iran is not looking for a deal. He is saying it wants a deal, just not one he would accept right now. That is a negotiating position, not a declaration of endless war. That is a door that is almost shut, but not yet locked. Senior officials from Oman, Egypt, Pakistan, and Turkey are holding behind-the-scenes talks with senior Iranian officials in an effort to start dialogue with the Trump administration toward a deal, or even a ceasefire. 4 countries working at the same time right now on the 14th day of a war. Oman has kept its offer of mediation, saying off-ramps are available. Badr al-Busaidi, the same Omani foreign minister, who was literally carrying messages between Witkoff and Araghchi in Geneva 2 weeks ago, is still in position, still available, still picking up the phone. And there is this. One of the most important political developments of the conflict's first week has been the visible split between Iran's civilian presidency and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. President Pezeshkian issued an apology to Gulf states on March 7th, promising that Iran would stop attacks on neighbors unless strikes were first launched from their territory. Hours later, IRGC-aligned Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf publicly reversed the commitment, saying Gulf nations hosting U.S. military bases would remain targets. 2 messages, 2 men, 1 country. This is the internal crack that every diplomat in the region is now trying to widen. This is the play. Here is what officials are saying privately. The path to de-escalation does not run through the hardliners. It never did. The IRGC, General Salami, the Parliamentary Speaker Ghalibaf, the new Supreme Leader Mojtaba Kham, these men do not want a deal. They want to survive. They want to keep power in a post-war Iran. And in their math, a deal that forces them to surrender enrichment, surrender missiles, surrender regional proxy networks, that kind of deal ends not with Iran's survival, but with their personal irrelevance. Their power base disappears. So they will fight. They will threaten $200 oil. They will fire Haidar missiles at Israeli territory. They will keep the strait closed as long as they possibly can. But President Pezeshkian, Foreign Minister Araghchi, the civilian leadership, these men, whatever their ideology, understand the war's path is unsustainable. At least 1,244 people have been killed and 1,851 injured by U.S.-Israeli attacks on Iran since February 28th. Iran's Ministry of Health says the infrastructure is gone. The air defenses are gone. Just about all of the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the sea. Trump said the Joshua Naval Base on Kharg Island is gone as of last night. The mines that Iran deployed in the Strait, U.S. Central Command said it eliminated 16 Iranian mine layers, along with multiple naval vessels near the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM says they hit 28 in total. The physical ability to keep the strait closed is weakening in real time, and Pezeshkian knows it. So here's the third pivot, the one that has not happened yet, but could in the next 24 hours. The June 2025 ceasefire precedent, which followed Qatar-mediated back-channel contacts and Trump's willingness to accept a face-saving Iranian gesture, provides a possible template. However, the strategic context in 2026 is materially different. CAM is dead, IRGC command is disrupted, and U.S. stated objectives, regime change, nuclear dismantlement, are maximalist. This is the problem. In June 2025, during the 12-day war, Tehran asked Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Oman to urge U.S. President Donald Trump to press Israel for an immediate ceasefire with Iran, offering flexibility in nuclear negotiations in return. It worked then. Trump accepted a face-saving gesture, called it a victory for everybody. The guns went quiet, but that was 12 days. This is now 14 days, and the goals on both sides have spread like a disease. In 2025, the U.S. goal was limiting Iran's nuclear program. In 2026, Trump's Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has added regime change to the list of war aims. That is the difference between a surgical strike and an occupation, and the IRGC hardliners know it. If the United States is seeking regime change, truly seeking the end of the Islamic Republic, then there is no deal to be made. There is only resistance. And in the IRGC's theology of martyrdom, resistance is indistinguishable from victory. Here is what nobody is telling you. China has both the economic leverage over Iran and the strategic interest in a ceasefire that no other major power has together. A Chinese-mediated framework, possibly involving a nuclear monitoring moratorium in exchange for stopping strikes, is the most workable near-term off-ramp. China is Iran's largest oil customer. China is the country whose yuan Iran is already asking to use to price the oil trade. China has a special envoy in the region right now, and China's interest in keeping the Strait of Hormuz open is not ideological. It is existential. China, India, Japan, and South Korea account for 75% of oil and 59% of LNG exports from the Gulf region. If that strait stays closed for another month, Chinese industrial output starts to shrink, and a Chinese economic contraction becomes an American recession, becomes a global recession. No president wants that on their watch, not even this one. So watch Beijing, not Washington, not Tehran. Beijing is the actor nobody is watching who may hold the key to the next 72 hours. A Chinese envoy walking into a room with Pezeshkian's deputies, offering to guarantee Iranian oil revenues in yuan, offering to step in with Washington, offering to bring Oman back into the mediator role. That is the scenario that ends this, or starts to. But here is what stops it. The IRGC tonight is threatening to escalate in a way that would make any negotiation almost impossible. Al Jazeera's Tauhid Asadi, reporting from Tehran, said U.S.-Israeli air attacks hit targets across the country, including in Tehran, Kharg, Isfahan, and Tabriz. He said this was a sign that we are not close to de-escalation. Iranian officials are talking about retaliatory strikes, with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps talking about using what they call their most advanced weaponry, including Haider missiles, to target Israeli territory. Haider missiles, these are hypersonic-capable ballistic missiles, the kind that Israeli air defenses have limited ability to stop. If the IRGC fires Haider missiles into Tel Aviv tonight, Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has his own domestic political survival tied to maximizing this war, will demand a response that escalates beyond anything the current U.S. strategy imagines. And Netanyahu, it should be noted, told Witkoff to his face just days ago that Iran cannot be trusted. That is not a man who wants an off-ramp. That is a man who wants a finish line. Qatar's Interior Ministry said Saturday that it was evacuating a number of key areas as Iran presses its retaliatory air campaign against Gulf countries. It said it intercepted 2 missiles after blasts were heard in the capital, Doha. Doha, the city that has served for decades as the backstage of Middle East diplomacy, the city where Hamas negotiated, where the Taliban met Americans, where Witkoff and Kushner once sat down to coordinate positions. That city is now evacuating civilians. That is what the collapse of diplomatic infrastructure looks like in real time. And in Europe, French President Emmanuel Macron is leading an international effort to unblock the energy choke point so oil, gas, and goods could flow freely again when circumstances permit. When circumstances permit, that phrase is doing enormous diplomatic work. It admits that no escort mission, no naval corridor, nothing military is possible while bombs are still falling and Iranian shore-based anti-ship missiles are still working. A retired French admiral put it bluntly. In today's context, sending warships or civilian vessels into the Strait of Hormuz would